name's Richard Dennis. I'm a historical geographer working at UCL. I work on issues to do with cities and modernity, basically cities in the 19th and the 20th centuries. I mostly work on London, but I've also worked on New York and on Toronto. And in fact, one of the interesting points about the London Journal is that it offers scope for comparison between major cities around the world. I'll mention this a little more in a moment, but one of our forthcoming issues, one of the papers, deals with a comparison of London and Paris. I've been on the editorial committee for a few years now. I'm also a trustee of the journal. And when I first got involved, the journal was at about the point when we were producing a special issue on tall buildings in London. Now, tall buildings is a very topical issue even today, with buildings like the Shard just about getting to completion at the time that I'm recording this. And in that tall buildings in London issue, we had some very topical papers, one which dealt with the skyline of London, all the issues about protecting St Paul's Cathedral and the view of St Paul's, and a paper which dealt with the South Bank, the area around Tate Modern, and plans for different high-rise buildings that were going to go up next to that. But tall buildings have been contentious in London ever since there's been London. So that was an issue which also had papers which dealt with medieval London, with early modern London, with Victorian flats, my own special interest, with Senate House, which is actually where I'm sitting now making this recording, which some people have claimed was sort of first skyscraper in London in the interwar years. We followed that special issue with an issue on sport in London, and that clearly is very topical this year as well. And some of those papers dealt with the Olympics of 1908 and the prospects for the Olympics for 2012, and with the idea of the legacy of what the Olympics leave behind. So again, a very topical issue. And along with those papers, there were papers which dealt with other aspects of sport in London, such as boxing and athletics among different minority groups within the city. Then in 2010, we had an issue which dealt with aerial views going up above London, initially in the imagination, or simply going up to the top of a church spire and drawing London, as somebody like Hollar did in the 17th century, but then moving on through people who went up in hot air balloons, or the earliest aircraft at the beginning of the 20th century, that kind of aerial photography of London, through to what we're familiar with today, through Google Earth on the one hand, and going up the London Eye, or maybe now the cable car that's about to go across the Thames. So again, an issue which allowed us to span quite a big historical time period and a diversity of different interesting perspectives on London's history, London's geography, London's politics. We have a special issue which is just about to be published on scenes of London, which are artistic representations of London in the long 18th century, but particularly focusing on the landscape, the sights of London, and the people within those landscapes. So papers which are going to feature the Thames and Thameside wharves in the famous paintings of Samuel Scott. Papers which are dealing through, in the early 19th century, with George Sharf's views of London, or with those wonderful plans of maps of streets showing all the shops of London that Tallis produced in the 1830s. And clearly that's an issue which is going to lend itself to large numbers of illustrations, and one of the things in these special issues that we're very keen on is having a diversity of photographs, maps, reproductions of paintings, cartoons, illustrations of documents. So we pride ourselves in having a good range of illustrations, particularly in these special issues. And of course in the online version you can see some of those illustrations in colour. The next special issue after London Scenes is one that I'm very closely involved with, which is to mark 150 years of the London Underground. The London Underground opened in January 1863. But we don't just want to look at it in that 150 years ago record, but we want to think about issues to do with the Underground today, or with the way that the history of the London Underground is thought about today. So we are hoping to have at least 2 papers which are purely historical, but other papers which deal with the cultural geography of the Underground, with the Underground in film and in cartography. And we're also planning on including a couple of smaller, shorter articles which deal with particular issues concerned with the heritage aspects, the conservation of the transport system, and of course with the future of the transport system, with forms of transport such as Crossrail. And then the final special issue that we currently know about, which is scheduled for 2014, seems a long way ahead now, but it's already well in the works, is dealing with leisure and suburbia in Victorian and Edwardian London. And that's an issue where, well, we know a lot about residential development and metro land and those kinds of things about suburban London, but perhaps we know rather less about how the suburbanites actually lived from day to day. So we're hoping to include articles in that issue which deal with gardening and photography, with cycling, and with all the kind of fashionable accessories that went with cycling out on weekend cycles from suburbia, and then in the interwar years with motoring in suburbia. And then also we have an article we're hoping to include which deals with carnival and sort of fetes and those kinds of very taken for granted activities within suburban London. So you can see that in all of these issues we're trying to bring together either a range of perspectives across time or a range of perspectives across different disciplines.